Hey guys, it's God Bars here, the self-proclaimed hip-hop historian, and this is the 48th episode of my series where I grab a vinyl from my collection, talk about why I love it, what influence it had, and what its place is in the grand scheme of hip-hop. 1998 was an interesting year for hip-hop to say the least. The deaths of Biggie and Tupac just a couple years earlier resulted in both sides kind of calling a truce, as I think either coast was able to see the dark, inevitable path the beef was kind of heading down. While Pac and the West were still dominating in 96, by the time 1998 rolled around, the pendulum had kind of swung back in the other direction a bit. The G-Funk sound was beginning to get tired and played out, and outside of DJ Quake's fourth album, the West Coast was largely moving in a different direction in 98. We were seeing more and more artists that seemed just as inspired by the New York sound and style as they were LA or California hip hop in general. This gave us moments in 1998 like the classic Hieroglyphics debut, headed by Del the Funky Homo Sapien, who had already established himself as a respectable figure in Oakland and would later spread that influence even further through Deltron 3030. Souls of Mischief were also in Hyro as well, and of course, they too were early examples of Bay Area artists determined to stand out. But New York was having no trouble finding its footing at this time. In fact, you could argue 1998 was one of the best years for East Coast releases in the genre. Just some of the heavy hitters the East put out that year include Capital Punishment by Big Pun, It's Dark and Hell is Hot by DMX, Gangstar's Moment of Truth, Black Star's debut, Hello Nasty by the Beastie Boys, and Money Power Respect by the Lox. They weren't the only ones having a good year though. There were gems all over, like the Dino Spectrum album, Miseducation of Lauryn Hill, and the first volume of Lyricist Lounge. However, you may have noticed I left out one crucial area, and that of course is the South. While more success was being seen in Southern hip hop with each passing year, they were still fighting the stigma of being called country bumpkins who didn't care about lyrics. But just like Three Stacks had made apparent a few years earlier at the Source Awards, the South had something to say. And with 1998, they showed the world what they meant, with Outkast putting out arguably the album of the year with Aquemini. At the same time, Master P was in the midst of his most prolific year with No Limit, with the label putting out at least 20 projects in 98 alone and helping dozens of talented artists get on as an effect. He wasn't even just acting as a curator, he released one of his best solo projects that year, in my opinion, and a couple other Southern artists who put out dope projects in 1998, like 8 Ball and Tear the Club Up Thugs. None of those are the legends that we're going to discuss today. Today we're discussing Cash Money and how they would find their single best release of the entire decade in Juvenile's 400 Degreez. Named after the temperature he would cook his chicken and fish at, this game changer sort of reminds me of the first couple 3 6 Mafia albums, at least in influence. In the way that, at the time, I don't think they found massive critical acclaim, but looking back, we acknowledge these projects were super ahead of their time. They're perfect examples that hip hop can be a bit goofy at times and not take itself too seriously, and that's okay. Ironically, I feel like a large amount of the response to these quote unquote less lyrical Southern acts at the time is all too similar to how people tend to undermine the culture today. In terms of influence on modern hip hop, a large slice of that pie has to go to 3 6 Mafia and DJ Spanish Fly. At least when it comes to the SoundCloud rap scene that dominated the mid to late 2010s. But while Juvenile had a pretty influential rap style and flow in his own right, another name that deserves just as much credit in my eyes is Manny Fresh. Manny was one half of the duo Big Timers, where he did the production as well as rapping alongside Birdman, who founded Cash Money Records with Slim. Of course, in more recent years, this label has become more famous for housing megastars like Nicki Minaj, Drake, and Tyga, but in the 90s, the act that carried the torch for Cash Money was Hot Boys. This New Orleans based crew consisted of Lil Wayne, Juvenile, Turk, and BG. And while every member was well above average and released memorable solo work and had their own technique and style on the mic, there's a strong argument to be made that the best project to ever come from the Louisiana powerhouse is Juvenile's third album here. For me, 400 Degreez is a perfect example of something I've talked about before, which is with how widely diverse the genre is. I'm totally fine with certain albums that aren't necessarily conscious or super lyrical. Where my issue comes in is if you talk about the same old things but don't frame it in an interesting or unique way. It's the same with J. Cole on the other side of the spectrum. Personally, I'm not a big fan just because you praise yourself as conscious or put down rap about partying, drugs, and girls. I respect and prefer an artist who talks about those subjects but does it creatively than someone who always references socio-political issues but never has any new take on them. Also, it isn't like this is a Playboy Cardi album. It isn't like you just turn your brain off because the lyrics don't matter at all. There's countless dope flows and slick lines all over this thing. There's a powerful element to Juvenile's voice that kind of stops you in your tracks and makes you listen to what he's saying, and you can usually understand him pretty clearly even in spite of the thick Louisiana accent. The immaculately mixed Manny Fresh instrumentals always give a full, lush background to Juvie's rugged, more aggressive approach, and there's even some pretty clever moments that get reincorporated throughout the album and help tie it together. One of these being the run for it mantra, which of course is a play on the run, Forrest, run line from Forrest Gump. This accumulates into the full track Run For It, where that little interpolation is the hook, and a relatively young Lil Wayne pops up for one of his multiple killer features on here. There's actually a lot of great features on this thing, one being Jay-Z himself, who was coming off the success of Volume 2, and that brought even more eyes to 400 Degreez. Hope ambitiously chose to show up on the Ha remix, which is a song where all I can really say is you'll probably hate it for the first time if you've never heard it. With the original Ha or the remix, it can take a few listens for what he's going for to click, and it's so experimental and forward thinking, it's even more admirable that he basically starts the album off with it, after the legendary intro, of course, which has a sublime sample I never get tired of. While I mentioned some of the features on here like Jay and Wayne, we also get appearances by the rest of Hot Boys, both Big Timers and Papa Roo. I never get bored listening to this album, since there's always either fiery group tracks via Welcome to the Nolia in the other Ha remix, or perfectly crafted club bangers like the smash hit Back That Ass Up. As usual, I have to give some honorable mentions before my main favorite tracks, and for this one, those are Ha, Ghetto Children, Follow Me Now, Rich People, Back That Ass Up, Juvenile on Fire, and the title track. My three overall favorite songs have to be Gon' Ride With Me, UPT, and Run For It. Thank you for watching my 48th video. Next time we're doing yet another East Coast classic, so check for that one, and if you enjoyed, be sure to like, subscribe, and let me know what your favorite moments are off this southern pillar of hip-hop. Don't forget to have a great day, and I'll see you next time, okay? Alright.